For these tests, I wanted to come up with a rig for shooting with a small camera. I got this Osmo Mobile, which acts as a gimbal to stabilize an iPhone or any small camera such as a GoPro. I also added an additional GoPro as a witness and a light source that could be carried with it. This was my first test using that rig, and it encountered some issues where the light changed too much and the resulting model couldn't recognize control points between photos, and so it attempted to flip them around and fit them into the scene in a new way. Additionally, the textures become very contrasty this way due to the different photos mashing together. I did a more limited set using the GoPro supported on the Osmo with the light at a fixed location. That way the landmarks wouldn't change so drastically in between frames. By basically waving the GoPro Osmo rig around like a magic wand, I could encircle the area to be scanned, and you can see the path here. There was almost no cleanup done to this dataset. I took the camera and pulled all the pictures off of it from time-lapse mode, so there was one frame taken every half second. And as you can see, the GoPro is really mushy in some sections. Areas where I moved too quickly are blurred and smeared, which explains a little bit of what we're seeing in the mesh. Now, going through and cleaning this dataset, removing some of the more blurry pictures and some of the pictures where pointing towards the light had become overcompensated, results in just as clear a path, but even more quality of a model. You can see that it reconstructed almost the entire room around it, and much of the model, even in this low quality setting where it's still soft and kind of cartoony, you can recognize the shapes of the cars and the trailers. You can see that it kind of had some trouble with the mesh bridges, which I anticipated and had actually put in there as kind of a challenge just to see if they would reconstruct. At this point, I reached the conclusion that the GoPro itself worked better as a witness cam attached to whichever camera rig I was using, because I could get this level of reconstruction basically for free while I was performing another scan. So at this point, I switched to using my iPhone, simply holding the iPhone in the Osmo and carrying the GoPro along with it. I could get a duplicate data set, basically a stereo pair is what my thinking was. And so these are just using the same single light source lighting condition and waving the phone around like a magic wand. I was able to capture this level of detail on the model itself throughout the table. It's still having trouble in the same areas, but is pretty convincing with the texture applied. Again, the lighting is still very contrasty at this stage, and in order to sell a scene as daylight, I'm going to have to look into lighting it a little bit more consistently. For Horizon model, though, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because it can stand up at a distance. And here's one oddity. It looks like the photos from the rear angle must have automatically compensated the exposure a little bit, and so we're getting a duplicate of the dome and tower off in the horizon there. At this point, I wanted to do some experimentation using these small, cheap magnetic lenses which would attach to my phone. I found the best results came from using this macro lens, which allowed me to place the camera a little bit closer to the model and also capture a lot sharper of detail. It seems to have leveled out the exposure a little bit as well, giving me a little more texture in the areas that were shadowed and a little more believable of a model. It's still having a little bit of trouble resolving the backside, and the mesh bridges are a huge challenge even with this macro lens attached. Now, this data set is a strong argument for shooting the right pictures. I took my time and brought it very close using the macro lens and made sure to orbit from every angle as much as I could, essentially encircling it and grabbing as many viewpoints while making sure that the pictures I did have were in sharp focus and covered the areas that I needed. I'm starting to get the mesh bridges now, and the textures themselves are very crisp